Good morning and welcome to the 10th meeting of the Health, Social Care and Sport Committee in 2026. I've received no apologies for today's meeting. The first item on our agenda is for the committee to decide whether to take items 6 and 8 in private. Do members agree?
Yes.
The second item on our agenda is to take evidence from a panel of witnesses on key issues and future priorities for sport and physical activity in Scotland. And I welcome to the committee Kim Atkinson, Chief Executive Officer, Scottish Sports Association, John Doigle, BE, Chief Executive Officer, Commonwealth Games Scotland, Forbes Dunlop, Chief Executive Officer, Sports Scotland, and Dr David Meir, Lecturer in Sport Coaching and Development, University of the West of Scotland. And we'll move straight to questions. And Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. Got my way. We've got sport for the end of the term. Can I start off just by asking, a general question around where do you think sport plays, or what part do you think sport plays in people living a healthy life? Come on, Forbes.
Want me to go first? Happy to. Good morning. Thanks once again for the opportunity to come along and speak with the committee. I think sport is an absolute foundation to healthy lives. The sport and physical activity, the evidence is extensive. I'm very conscious sitting next to academic colleague who can speak more about the evidence than me, but the research is compelling. Sport and physical activities impact on people's physical, mental and social health, and that's why it's so important that we encourage more people to be physically active in whatever means that they can.
If I layer something on top of that, if I could, to you, David, given I think we would all agree exactly with what Forbes said, that given that we're having a reduced life expectancy and a reduced healthy life expectancy, what does that tell us about the state of where sport, or what sport's playing in Scotland at the moment?
Well, I think that's a very difficult question. Firstly, sport is one element, and I think if we approach this from a policy perspective, the consideration of the physical activity for health framework, sport sits within one element of that in terms of promoting health, and I think it's important to recognise that sport is one attribute towards that. Sports participation tends to stay relatively static. It has done, not just in Scotland, but across many countries for numerous different reasons. But I think bottom line is that it requires more targeted investment if we're going to see increases, be it that at sport or physical activity. Okay. Because we're continuing to do very similar things and getting very similar results. So because the money isn't there to support it.
So, Kim, from your perspective, you're obviously representing governing bodies. Feedback from governing bodies as to the current situation in terms of resource to deliver what they can deliver. My feeling is, and I should have declared an interest as a performance coach myself still, my feeling is that governing bodies are increasingly struggling to deliver the across platforms that they should be able to deliver on.
Sorry, it's on. Thanks, Brian, and thanks. Lovely to see everyone this morning. There's a balance of everything, Brian, and I suppose at the end of the parliamentary session it's always interesting to look back and see where things were and where things are just now, and I do feel Scottish sport has made monumental progress in very many areas, and we're obviously sitting in a very fortunate position where we know we've got Glasgow 2026 on the horizon. We know our men's football team have qualified for the World Cup. We've just had a phenomenal Winter Olympics with a Scottish team in Scottish curling. There's a huge amount to celebrate from a performance point of view and what we're looking ahead, but at the same time we know in speaking with our members there's a huge amount that has been achieved. So I was speaking to Tennis Scotland the other day. They've had a 25% increase in membership over the last 5 years. 25%, that's
which
huge.
one was that?
Tennis Scotland.
Okay.
That's a huge progress. There's innovative partnerships across Scottish sport. Bowl Scotland have got a huge partnership with a veterans charity. Again, innovative, really different, but looking at the contribution that they make to older adults and working in different sets of partnerships. Table Tennis Scotland have got a unique partnership with Parkinson's. They host an event every year. It's one of the best attended events that they have. If you can ever go, honestly, it's incredible. And the feedback from the Chief Executive of Parkinson's in Scotland says this is changing lives for people with Parkinson's. So across any number of measures, there's a lot of really good stuff happening. But you're absolutely right, Brian. There's no getting away from the fact that it's been a really, really challenging environment. But that's true across the whole of sport. We know that 90% of investment in sport in Scotland goes through local authorities. Our local authority partners are struggling. I know because they aren't represented here today, but I'm sure they would say the same. That's been a challenge. And likewise, our partners at Community Leisure UK, who are also doing amazing things. I think that the silver lining for governing bodies is we know that through a vast partnership work, through ourselves, through governing bodies, through Sport Scotland and through the Scottish Government, there is new investment in Scottish sport. So this new £40 million uplift that was approved in the budget is a huge boost to Scottish sport. That presents massive opportunity, but we also know that that's not quite fulfilling the government's commitment to double the contribution to sport that it fulfilled, that it outlined in its manifesto and in the programme for government. And also we know it's not all sustainable. Only half of that is going to be ongoing investment as things stand at the moment. That will allow, hopefully, the workforce within Scottish sport to get a bit of stability, which again is work that Sport Scotland have been championing and leading. That planning for the workforce to actually know they're going to have jobs, they're not going to be made redundant, they might actually get an uplift in salaries, some for the first time in very many years, and allowing that to then support the club network, the volunteer network and a wide range of things moving on. So it has been a tough time, Brian, but if it shows one thing, it shows how very resilient sport is. We all know sport increases our resilience. Well, that's certainly been true for the workforce across Scottish sport. We're optimistic that there are more positive times ahead, but at the same time, we're still looking to make sure that more of that funding could be secured on an ongoing basis.
Thanks for that. When we're looking, I mean, I'm actually trying to look at how the journey. We've talked about this before, folks. The journey of how do we, from preschool into primary school, into secondary school, into sport, into and onwards. Where are we in terms of connecting up that pathway or creating that pathway? Because my gut feel is on the ground, and this is anecdotal for myself. Clubs are struggling to recruit. Struggling to, I'm just thinking in terms of obviously my own sport, clubs struggling to put teams out in leagues, that kind of thing. So where are we with creating that sort of pathway and the ease of pathway, really?
I think there's a real difference across sports. So there are examples, as with everything, there are examples where we're seeing real good progressive work. There are also examples where other sports are struggling a little bit more. The connection between an active schools programme that we invest £12 million a year in and the 400 coordinators there and the work that they do to increase physical activity at primary school and the connection then to local clubs can be down to the capacity of the volunteers within those local clubs to make some of those connections and links. So where you have that capacity, you have people who have got a little bit extra time, maybe then we're seeing some really good work, but it is very dependent on volunteer network, as sport is across the country. So I think the pathways for people who are active are very, very good. The people who haven't quite made it into those pathways, there's definitely more of a challenge. So if you've made it, you've made that first step, you're in a club, you want to progress, then I think there's good opportunities for you. But I do recognise that first step into a club, into the club environment, can sometimes be difficult. And I also recognise that school-based activity is, I believe, could also be enhanced.
I think that's the thing. The three most dangerous words in life in my day. But it used to be the introduction to sport was through school. That doesn't happen so much now. Certainly in comprehensive, it's more. I've often said that sport's becoming the bastion of middle class and private education. So. Where are we in terms of releasing that the school estate, if you like, into into more sports and wider environment? How are we utilising what we have? Because there's a huge squeeze just now on facilities. Are we utilising what we have to its best?
If I could just touch on 2 points there. Firstly, we're just coming to the final stages of a review of the Active Schools programme. So 20 years worth of investment that we're very proud of. Continuous investment over that period into a programme which employs 400 coordinators, every school in Scotland connected through a coordinator to that programme. And the review of the Active Schools programme, which has been led by Research Scotland, has been given us some really positive feedback. It's also highlighted where we need to do better. But it's something we're proud of because there's not many programmes have had that longevity, and we can see the real impact, and we can now see a lot of people who were in the first wave or benefited from Active Schools in the early stages coming through Young Leaders programmes, now into employment within sport, but also volunteering through clubs and leading a number of clubs. So the schools element of it, the Active Schools review, has been helpful. It's given us an opportunity. Our board had a big debate about this last week, and we'll have another final conversation when the report's concluded in April. And part of our thinking is how Active Schools sits alongside all the other interventions that should be happening in the school environment. So that's one piece of work. It would be nice to come back maybe in the new term and talk more about when that piece of work's completed. Sorry, on your second point round about the school estate, another really significant piece of work which is again in its final stages. We have conducted over a year's worth of work to do a full review of the sport and leisure estate in Scotland. That piece of work looked at both the community facilities but also importantly the school facilities. It builds on work we've done in the past to look at the school estate, and again you'll see a very, very different picture in different schools and different authorities across Scotland, some with fantastic access agreements and agreements with local community clubs and organisations, others which aren't, and part of our job is to work with those authorities to challenge some of that practice. We're also aware that the first wave of PPP schools, those contracts are coming to an end. I know, speaking with colleagues in Falkirk, those first contracts come back in, the council taking those over again, and the opportunities to look at how school facilities are accessed comes as those contracts come through. So it's a very patchy view out there.
Yep.
I think the point Forbes makes about Active Schools is really powerful. But again, let's not forget that's the first money that's ever really been moved from the health budget directly into sport, and look at the impact that that's had. However many years on, it's still having that impact. So I think there's a really good case study to be aware of there. I do think there are some innovative things happening in schools. So pickleball, we're saying that in one term, so our newest recognised governing body in Scotland, in one term in schools, they had over 8,500 visits, which is huge for a very small and growing sport. And I know there's been some really innovative work done by curling across the ASN network. So again, there's really innovative things happening where there are those connections. But to your point specifically around facilities, it's a favourite of both of ours as a conversation, Brian. I know. I think, in terms of the asks of our members, our manifesto commitment, that is again one of the pushes that they've made across all the parties to say community access to community facilities continues to be a huge challenge, and the school estate inevitably is part of that. That's part of that conversation that we had recently with the Causeless SIG, which showed a real commitment across councillors. Forbes and I were both there, but a real commitment across councillors saying they want to solve this issue. So I think there is a lot of appetite for it. I still think it remains a huge challenge, but as you say, the opportunity is huge. But let's be very clear, the language our members use is community access to community facilities, not community sports access to community sports facilities. This is a community issue. In work that we do across the wider voluntary sector, if you chat, and I know, Brian, you've been in conversations that we've hosted to the cross-party group with colleagues across YouthLink Scotland, across Girl Guides, across the Scout Network, across youth organisations, across any type of community body, they are saying if the community can't get into a community facility, there's nowhere for people to go. If we're talking about creating social connections, if you're talking about intergenerational connections in communities, if you're talking about diversionary activities for young people, pick your social area. If there's nowhere for people to actually go, you're snookered at the first hurdle. So it is still a huge issue that is raised across our members. Inclusive and affordable facilities, without question, but also, as you say, at that local level, and the school estate plays a huge opportunity. I'll also remind the committee that in your committee report on children and young people, the review that you did early doors in the term, you referred to the fact that access to the school estate was an issue raised in the previous committee sets of reports, so your predecessors. So it's been a very long-standing issue, and convener, it would be one of our asks on behalf of our members as a legacy action for the next committee to say, could this be looked at? As Forbes said, there's work going on with that. To be able to come back and have a conversation about community access to community facilities would be incredibly powerful. So that's an ask we'd make, please, convener.
Well, I'm going to bring you in, John, since you work at the sharp end. Sharp end of sport. I mean, and we don't mind me saying you've been there for a while. But is there a trend in terms of where the performance athletes are coming from in terms of the pathways that they now follow?
I mean, our teams obviously come from a wide range of backgrounds. It's fair to say that each one of those sports probably has its own socio-economic kind of background. So I think one of the strengths we've got with Team Scotland is that we see different people from different parts of the country. We've had all 32 local authorities within there. We've had 73-year-old gold medalist from Dumfries the last games, a 13-year-old swimmer from Shetland in the 2014 games. So they do come from different directions. Again, until we go through this particular process with these games, we'll obviously get an idea in terms of where things may have moved in terms of those demographics. But they tend to be from the same elements. All of those athletes have different challenges in terms of where they're coming from and the expense of their sports and the commitments they and their families are going through and making. So I think the wider network that's actually there is actually really important for them. And it starts with, we'll have 165 athletes at these games coming up. All of those athletes come from local communities, and that's effectively where that start with them and their families kind of come from. So they then move into the system, and obviously with kind of Forbes and the governing bodies in terms of, and then Scottish Institute of Sport, those on the UK sport programs as well. So yeah, there's help needed at every stage going through, but we do have a wide range of different athletes from across Scotland.
If I could squeeze one little one in, one of the things that the Commonwealth Games we're looking at in 2014, when we talked about legacy, I think the disappointment is to see some of the great facilities that were built in 2014 that were supposed to be there for legacy falling into disrepair. Thinking of the hockey at Scotstoun, for example. I mean, there has to be a certain disappointment in terms of not managing to develop that legacy.
Look, I mean, recognise, I think as Kim said and Forbes said, there's kind of challenges across the wider sector. I would actually pay tribute to the fact that if we didn't actually have those facilities, we wouldn't have these games in 2026 in terms of the other ones that were built. So, there's a trade-off in terms of that aspect, in terms of that level of investment. Probably pass through to Forbes to talk more broadly about the wider facility network, but certainly from what we've done with the games, the fact that we've had the Emirates Arena, the fact we've had Toll Cross, and the fact that Scotstoun there as well has meant we've been able to move forward and in the space of 2 years and put on these games. I have to say, with some refurbishment money which has been invested, which has come through from Commonwealth Sport.
Okay.
Mr. Russell. Emma Harper.
Thanks, convener. Good morning to you all. We're talking about health and well-being at the beginning, and I'm just thinking about the other end of the age continuum, where we're seeing a real rise in walking football across Scotland, and rugby as well. I know there's a women's team at Annan now, but there's challenges with facilities as well for walking football teams, and I know that the Stranraer Club are partnering with Stair Park and Arthritis UK, which used to be Versus Arthritis, and that makes me think about the health and wellbeing aspect as to making or help support people to be fitter for surgery, for knee replacement, for instance. So we heard about that. Is that something that you can comment on in terms of walking football, walking rugby? I myself participated, and it was great fun, and they were far more skilled than what I was, but I'm interested in the walking football, walking rugby.
Yeah, and I would add walking netball into that. Bounce back to netball has been a hugely successful programme led by Netball Scotland, encouraging particularly women who played maybe netball at school a number of years later to come back, and it's a walk-in version of the game that's been introduced in netball as well. So I think these developments over the last 10 years have had a big impact. The point you highlight, though, would apply to every version of sport, which is how can you access facilities? And we've seen particularly in football and the conversation with the SFA, their number one issue and challenge is access to pitches, and they talk about it more about the growth of the women and girls game. More so necessarily than the walking game, but it's the same issue. How do you access facilities to see these growing and developing parts of sports take part? So I think they're a great addition, they're a great development. I would also add that the work of the leisure trusts in particular, they do some fantastic GP referral work, some of the intervention work, the support work for people pre-surgery, pre-appointments while they're on waiting lists. There's some fantastic work done across the country by the leisure trusts, at particular focus with those older adults.
Mm-hmm. Just to build on that, thanks Emma, and it's a great question. I suppose two particular things in building up to that. So obviously you'll all be aware that the Scottish Government launched the Physical Activity for Health framework. So again, many organisations were part of that. I think the caveat is we need to remember, sport and physical activity is more than just about health, but I think the contribution that it makes to health, I think, positions that really strongly and presents a huge opportunity to move forward. Just quickly to your facilities point, Brian, I do think there's a conversation that we need to make sure happens between national and local partners. So I know Scotstoun was mentioned by John. I know Tennis Scotland, as I think committee members are aware, having a real challenge with actually losing indoor tennis facilities to build paddle facilities. As the governing body for both tennis and paddle, they want that, but they've actually offered a grant free of charge to say, can you build them outdoors? Now, so we need to make those connections better. I know similarly there's been some conversations around hockey, so we need to make sure those things connect to provide that legacy that John was talking about. I think you're absolutely spot on, Emma, in terms of that connection for older adults. And I remember a former Chief Medical Officer, Sir Harry Burns, saying actually one of the key targets for health should be people pre-retiral. So we're supporting that social connection for people that are actually still getting out and doing things, but as you say, they're maintaining an aspect of health that they have from being at work, in being active through work and in connecting with people, and we need to be able to target that a little bit more. And the examples of the sports that you've raised and Forbes has picked up are exactly perfect examples of that. But I would echo what Forbes said, that the point is so many sports would love to do an adapted version of the sport, any number of different things. You just look at Scottish disability sport and they're masters of that. But to Brian's point, sport has been challenged with a resource to say, if you had a little bit of money in an innovation pot, what would you do? Walking basketball seems like a very easy suggestion. There would be many other sets of things where governing bodies, but give them the resource and say, you're experts in your sport, you're connected with pathways worldwide, what's everybody else doing? But there's never been that luxury to say, what would you do? What would that look like? And just to Scottish disability sport, hopefully everybody's seen their call to action. So again, to your point, Emma, about the health benefits of really putting physical activity in the heart of opportunities for people with a disability to genuinely save lives, not just change lives. So I think there's a massive opportunity with that. But I also think there was a report many years ago around Sport for Health where they actually mapped out, depending on the kind of condition that people had, the sport that they should be participating in that would benefit their health and the longer term opportunities through their life. That's not something that's ever been looked at in Scotland, but it started to work through if you had physical issues, whether they were musculoskeletal, whether they were heart conditions, whether they were respiratory issues, whether you needed to build bone density. Here are the exact types of sports you should work on. What an amazing opportunity in future to sit with a GP referral to say, right, OK, here's what would be beneficial for you, go through a process. Here are the local sports that are available to you. We could get to social prescribing. Actually, what you should be doing is a little bit of table tennis, actually, or you should be doing a bit of bowls, or you should be doing a bit of walking. But actually, here is where the local club and connection is. There's a huge opportunity with that we're missing. But again, I think that presents a real opportunity. It's a bit of a step further in research, but the governing bodies would love to be part of those conversations to say, we know our sport could be available to so many more people.
Mm-hmm. I know a young woman who started playing wheelchair rugby. Her asthma was so unstable. She didn't need to use a wheelchair all the time, but when she started playing wheelchair rugby, her lung health improved, and she's part of the Edinburgh Rugby Club now as well. So yeah, thanks, convener.
Carol Mochan.
Thank you, convener. Thanks very much. I suppose it just adds on from what Emma was saying and what you were saying there, Kim. And I'd be interested in the piece of research. So I recently visited quite a rural group of women Boost Women Group in Girvan, and they were talking about the kind of things that they would like to do, and it's difficult sometimes to find the space, as you say, but you know, people are often very good at coming up with their own solutions. And I wonder, just the research that you were talking about there, what can we do you think, to gather the information about how people do get these solutions to the different kinds of sports and activity that would suit them for their health needs? Is there something more that we're needing to do at a Scottish-wide level to capture that?
I'll go first. I think and I say this working for and leading a national agency, I think the solutions are always best found locally, and so the very group that you met with, they will have, I think, much better insight as to what's going to work for them and for their community than we will ever have sitting in our offices in Glasgow. And so a lot of our investment goes to local partners, and the conditions round about that investment are for those local partners to engage with local community groups and make sure that what's being offered meets the needs. So I met with South Ayrshire Council just on Friday, actually, and we were talking about that very thing through our investment in community sport hubs and the work that's happening down in Girvan and some of the groups that are developing and growing there. And I believe strongly it needs to come community up. I really do. So our job is to make sure we get investment to local partners, and that investment is then targeted at local groups, and they decide and design what's right for them.
Probably two thoughts, Carol. The first part is a recognition of the role that governing bodies play. So, you know, the nature of community sports clubs, you know, there are so many different activities going on in a local area. But if you're registered with your governing body, then you've got sets of assurances around child protection, around equality, around a really fundamental set of governance requirements that we all believe, I'm sure, is vital to ensure the safety, health and inclusive nature of sport. I think with a little bit of support, governing bodies have a network of their clubs, but again could have a further detail to be able to provide a reference point per sport. I take Forbes' point, having something nationally across every sport can be challenging, but that's the role of governing bodies. They have a lot of that data. They could make that a little bit more accessible in different ways with that kind of opportunity. I think the second part falls on the health service, which I appreciate is a difficult thing to say because they're not exactly short of things to be doing, I accept. But, you know, we know that if you go in and get your, you know, referral to a GP and have a conversation, you'll be asked about, you know, if you smoke, you'll be asked about how much you drink. Are you routinely asked about how physically active you are? I believe it's sporadic. I believe sometimes you are. I believe there's been a push on that in a number of years. Is that still happening to the level that we would like it to? Because at the end of the day, again, if you look at the quality indicators of life, our former Chief Medical Officer will tell you that how physically active you are will determine how long you live more than any other indicator. Do we ask that in every GP appointment, how physically active you are? And then where's that connection then from the GP service to community network to say, well, we are aware, as Forbes says, this is what's happening locally. Have you thought about A? Have you thought about B? Here are the local options. But I think the other part to that, and again, there are lots of examples in communities where this works well, but saying, what's the barrier that prevents people going? And a huge amount of that, and I think particularly for women, and probably also, Emma, for some older adults, is a confidence thing. Oh, well, it's all very well and good knowing that there's an activity out there and there's a sport I could go and play and everybody sounds very nice. But there's a barrier often in confidence, whether you haven't played sport for a while or you've got a health condition, to think, can I do that? Well, again, I've seen examples of buddying systems where somebody actually goes with you to the first couple of sessions to help you build their confidence, and then they peel off and you're like, oh, this is great. So I think there's a different connection with the health service that creates an opportunity in asking those questions. But I also think it's then that genuine pragmatic connection to say people have the confidence to take that step and fulfil that opportunity.
Thank you. Thanks for convening.
Florence.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning to witnesses. What actions have been taken and what further actions are required to address the physical activity gap between girls and boys?
Thanks. There's a huge range of interventions that have been taken, but it became almost the central discussion at our board a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about active schools, because we still, you know, the data is very, very clear, the difference in participation rates. Interestingly, the active schools programme female girls' participation is 48%, boys is 52%. And again, all the evidence would suggest at that younger age, that primary school age, can be quite close. There's not a huge difference, but as then girls move into secondary, we start to see the differences. We've got a range of interventions, our Fit for Girls programme, our Young Female Leaders programmes, where we bring together girls from across all schools and we talk to them about the work they're doing in their schools, the sessions that they're providing. Again, really trying to listen to them about when you speak to your friends in school that maybe aren't active, aren't taking part, what is it that they want, and can you help co-design with them the intervention. So a range of national interventions, a range of programmes, all about bringing people together, giving them the confidence, some of the tools to then go and have those conversations in their own schools particularly, but also within their own community areas. What more can we do? There's so many different aspects to this, because I think it's a trap you can easily fall into, to think there's a singular reason why girls don't participate in sport as much as boys do, and it's definitely not that simple. There's a whole range of different reasons, and we just need to systematically keep on working on those reasons and providing a whole range of different opportunities for girls. But it's a stubborn challenge that we have worked on for years, and we really haven't, as has been said, the data is pretty static. We really haven't made inroads to some of those inequalities.
Perhaps I can add from my end, in terms of Commonwealth Games, in the last games we had more women than men in our team. The medal events of those games were 50-50. The balance is now around that area. So a lot of the events where people can now go through and compete, obviously the girls and women have got an opportunity there to be performing at the top level, and they're selected based on obviously the merit of meeting those particular standards. So where we do have a challenge is in high performance female coaches, and again it's an area which I know Sport Scotland are tackling at the moment, and for the next games we'll have a development program that will sit alongside the team called Achieve, and we'll be targeting getting some young female coaches there to experience and see the games. So, you know, when they next apply for Commonwealth Games teams or kind of high performance teams, then they don't get the question of, well, you haven't been there, so therefore we can't select you. They've got that experience. They can learn from each other. So there's a number of initiatives which I think are happening at the moment, kind of linked up within that aspect. But yeah, the funnel coming through at the bottom is always going to be a challenge, I think.
Thank you. Around, you mentioned data. Oh, sorry, on you go.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of points around this. I think the active schools data is good in telling us certain things, but it doesn't go in deep enough to what we really need to know to understand the real reasons behind why the participation rates aren't growing necessarily for young girls. Obviously, that links into a significant drop-off rate in secondary schools. We know a number of reasons for that. But I think your own report in 2023 on female participation in sport and physical activity made a couple of recommendations. One around active schools, which you're seeing that there's a tender put out, and there's going to be a lot of data hopefully coming back around the active schools programme in the next 12 months. But one of the key points that stood out to me in that report, which I think is really important, is the focus on fun over competition in female girls and women's participation in sport. And that was a fundamental point amongst many others associated with health and so on. That was the one that stood out to me. And also stood out to me in recent reports around sort of Norway's success at the recent Winter Olympics and their sport policy, which focuses very clearly on enjoyment and joy in sport. And I think these things are linked and really, really important. If something is enjoyable, if something brings us joy, then we're going to want to participate within it. And I think sometimes we lose focus around the purpose of what we're doing. You know, and I think if we can really harness that in this type of activities that we put on, and the type of programs that we deliver, then we're going to see an increase.
Kim?
David, it's a great question, and I very much welcome the commitment across the committee to this subject. It's been a long-standing topic that you keep coming back to, and I really, really welcome that. I think there's probably a number of examples of really good practice, and I would certainly highlight Scottish student sport in the wider work that they do. So hopefully many of the committee have maybe been along to visit some of the active campus coordinators, a new project that they've been working through with Sport Scotland, which is groundbreaking. But also, if you look at Scottish student sport, more women participate in student sport than men. It's a very unusual environment, but again, there's something going very, very right there, and hats off to the brilliant team at Scottish Student Sport and their network that work with that. But let's also be very clear, I think we've seen a huge change over the last number of years in not that women and girls being active is more important to governing bodies than it's ever been, because I think they've always been very committed to that. But I think they've taken quite a number of fundamental steps. So Scottish Golf, supporting women and girls being active, is one of their top priorities in their current strategic plan. And we're not saying, it's priority number 6. It's right up there. And they're doing phenomenal work to make that happen. Similarly, Scottish Rugby have just launched their specific women and girls programme and strategy. And again, promoted teams internally to reflect that this is as important part of the game as any part. And obviously Scottish football, again, it's a huge part of what they're doing. And actually, I think Forbes mentioned earlier, one of the key challenges Scottish football would say is a lot of their waiting lists, which impact women and the growth of the women's game, is that they've got challenges around access to enough pitches to be able to actually support enough people that want to be playing football in the different clubs and the different activities. So there's a lot of really good stuff happening. To your point of where are there challenges, I think there's probably a couple of things. I think the point that John made rightly around women's coaches is a huge challenge. I think the number of volunteers and female volunteers is a huge part of that. So more men volunteer in sport than women. In the wider voluntary sector, it's the other way round. So, one would say one's done something right, otherwise you read it either way. But all of that links, I think, to role models. And again, seeing somebody that's supporting you and understanding what it is that you want to achieve. And I think a lot of that comes down to a time challenge. So where are we supporting people to be more active, but more fundamentally within that, where are we supporting people to volunteer or engage in their local communities? Volunteering numbers have dipped for the first time in very many years. Now we're slowly seeing an increase, but again, similar to the point to Brian about community access to community facilities, access to volunteering and volunteering support is an issue for everybody. What can we do? We can try and think, we've talked before about employer-supported volunteers. Where are we allowing people time off from their work, which is where most people spend most time, to take part in coaching or volunteering or any form of community activity? People need more time, particularly when they're time pressured, and there's inequality riddles volunteering because it's people who can afford to take time out to volunteer. So there's something in there, David, that we need to do to provide more resource for women who automatically do more caring responsibility than men, to be able to be active, to be able to engage, to be able to volunteer, to be able to coach, and again to support women to say, well, actually, I could be a future coach, or actually they're just supporting my volunteering journey. And I think the role modelling within that is incredibly important. Again, something that was raised in the committee's report. So I think there are some very practical things that we need to do that support the infrastructure that supports physical activity for girls and young women.
Around data collection, it was mentioned earlier, could it be improved to capture that complete picture of young people's participation in physical activity and to let us know what the barriers are?
Absolutely, no doubt we could do a lot more, and these things all come down to getting the right balance, don't they? I know Sport England, for example, spend multi-million pounds each year on a participation survey. We rely more on the household and the health survey, which are at a much higher level, don't give us such granular detail. It's a judgment call as to whether we should be spending more of the money that we have at our disposal on further data, research, insight versus continue to invest direct into clubs, coaches, and so you're always trying to make that judgment. We have just recently agreed to put in place a new system, a moving to community system, which will, in simplest terms, it will take in data from governing bodies, from local authorities, from the school setting. It'll take in all our facilities and it'll map them all out, and we'll start to be able to see where we're seeing high levels of participation, lower levels of participation, a mismatch between participation levels and facilities. And so it's a big database that pulls all that information and then presents it back out to us. So we are investing in that space. We can always do more. It's always just that line about how much more information and data do we gather versus how much that money goes out the door to support coaches, volunteers, clubs.
Yeah, I think it's a conversation I've had with people in practice as well. And the money is limited. So as an academic, if I went to an organisation and we're talking, say, match funding for PhD students, it's just, so they don't have the finances within the voluntary or the public sector for that, which exists out within the private sector. But I think what we can do, and this has been called for by Grant Jarvie's report in 2019, work by Nicholas Rowe and work by myself, is more closer connections between sport and academia, and the way in which we can help and support each other within that. Okay, and I think that's a really important opportunity to build the data and build our understanding of the why of what's happening within Scotland. And I think there's a lot of scope for developing our understanding. There's quite significant gaps in our knowledge and understanding about what is happening in sport and physical activity, both within schools and also more broadly within sport as well. And we've touched on some of those issues. For instance, the utilisation of the school estate is one, the quality of physical education in primary schools. Really, really importantly, those who are undertaking less than 30 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity per week, which currently stands at close to 1 in 4 of the Scottish population. Okay, and we're having a growing disparity between an inactive and an active class, which has been going on for quite some time. So that links obviously into poverty, specific inequalities, and opportunities. So there's huge gaps in our knowledge, but there are some steps that we could take towards addressing that.
Okay, one final question.
We need to move on.
Right, okay. No problem.
Quite a lot of interest, and we only have 50 minutes left of the session, and we've only covered 2
Thank you, Convener.
Gillian Mackay.
Thanks, Convener. My first question is directly to Forbes, if that's okay. When giving evidence last March, you informed the committee that Sport Scotland was working with the University of the West of Scotland to develop an anti-racism framework for Scotland's sports sector. Could you give us an update on this work?
Absolutely. So we have we've just received the final draft version of an anti-racism framework. The framework is for Sport Scotland in the first instance. But you can imagine this will be very easy to share with our partners. But I felt quite strongly in speaking to the lead for that piece of work that we needed to lead by example, and we needed to adopt a framework for Sport Scotland in the first instance. That doesn't change a whole range of wider work that we do. So that work is pretty much finished. It's been led by Dr Khadija Mohammed, who not only works for the University of West of Scotland but also chairs SAME, and it's through our partnership that we've developed over a number of years with SAME that we've actually commissioned, and that piece of work's been completed.
That's great. What wider appetite is there across the different governing bodies that sit underneath Sport Scotland to either adopt something similar or develop their own, particularly given what happened with Cricket Scotland in recent times?
Yeah, there's huge appetite. There's been a lot happened in the last 4 years. Our partnership with Sporting Equals, part of that partnership was about providing some expertise and support to the governing bodies to review their policies, their procedures, their training, their approach. And that partnership with Sporting Equals is coming to an end. That's 3 years we've been working on that. And we can see over that 3-year period, and slightly longer actually, some good progress. Of course, there's still more work to do, and the way I see it is the anti-racism framework that we've developed, that now gives us some real structure, and it gives us something to reflect the work against. We've done a wide range of work, but I think it's important that the framework now gives us structure, and against that structure it's much easier to hold us to account as an organisation. That's why I put it in the context of Sport Scotland in the first instance, but we will develop that further so that it can be taken up, applied and used by the governing bodies and other partners.
Gillian, could I just come in there? Is that...
Yeah.
Sorry, Gillian. It's an important question, and certainly I totally agree with Forbes in terms of that appetite. But I also think the work that Cricket Scotland has done, which, excuse me, again, I know is something that the committee has been really close to. You know, we know how seriously Cricket Scotland has taken this. We know that they've developed their EDI action plan, looking at that cultural reform within the organisation. But some of the really important steps that they've taken, I think, can easily be shared with governing bodies. And I know Cricket Scotland are very happy to do that. So some of the e-learning module work that they've done is groundbreaking and again seen as a best practice in a number of different areas. They've done guides for a range of their local clubs, and they've got an Alert Us system as an example of just a few of the things that they've done, all of which Cricket Scotland is very, very happy to share, and I think there's real appetite across governing bodies. So I think it's a compliment to everybody, the way they're progressing, the attitude that they've taken to this, and their willingness to share, and the appetite of other governing bodies to learn from that.
That's really useful, thanks, Kim. And one for the whole panel, what further actions do we think could be taken to ensure that Scottish sport is welcoming and inclusive to people from all backgrounds? And I'll maybe go to Kim first, if that's okay.
Thanks, Gillian. I think there's a number of parts to that. So from the inclusion part, again, I'll point to the work that Scottish Disability Sport have done and the work that they continue to do. It genuinely is award-winning across a range of their work. So I think it's looking at their call to action and recognising that they've outlined very pragmatic steps that can be taken by everybody. So this isn't about disability clubs or disability organisations. This genuinely is about work that any club can do. So there are 4 points to their action plan. So it's about including people, making sure they're involved in shaping services. It's about that whole sport approach that Forbes will talk to in terms of that whole sport system. But again, making sure that there's the opportunity for people to be involved at each different stage. And a huge part of that, Gillian, as well, is looking at the social care system and providing those sets of opportunities. So we know from Scottish Disability Sport point of view, there's an alarming number of people that are still worried that their benefits will be cut if they are seen to A, volunteer, or B, be physically active. And an alarming proportion of those from their report actually say that they know somebody whose benefits have been cut as a result of having been physically active. So that's 1 in 5 people believe they know somebody whose benefits have been cut because they're physically active. So we need to be really clear that that's not what social security systems are about. But I think further than that, there's a considerable opportunity as we think about social care and self-directed support. So being really clear that self-directed support monies can be used for people to be physically active, because, as I say, we know the impact of people with a disability being active as well. Gillian, I know it's something you're very close to, literally is life-changing, both in the quality of their lives, but also in the extension of lives for many people. So I think Scottish Disability Sport genuinely are experts in this, and their call to action is something that across our membership they would fully support. Again, in terms of being more accessible, a huge part of that is exactly the same for anybody regardless. It is that you have somewhere local that you can participate in, whatever it is you want to participate in. It's that local access. I appreciate travel will be a huge connector for that for a range of people. But if there aren't those local opportunities, that is a challenge for people. Again, I know in the women's report that you had, when you did your inquiry, there was a huge focus on feminist town planning. Again, I think that's a really interesting area to continue to come back to. All the things that make a lovely environment for people to be active, for women particularly perhaps to be active during the day, are all the reasons women are scared to be active at night. So again, I think there's something we need to consider there. And again, supporting coaches, supporting volunteers, so there are people who can support people on their journey. So it's the same sets of issues, Gillian. Those things cover a myriad of opportunities.
Thank you.
Hello, sorry, is that
Sandesh?
It didn't come through that you've called me convener. Is it my turn to ask questions?
Yeah.
Thank you. I'd like to start, and surprisingly, I've got to declare my interest as a practicing NHS GP, which is rather surprising given the topic. But there's been a lot of conversation, Kim, especially from yourself, about GPs going through and trying to create time for talking about activity and linking people to local sports clubs. So I suppose my first question is, how much time do you think GPs have to be able to do this?
Thank you, Sandesh. I'm entirely confident you're much more expert on that subject than I am. I make no bones about how busy the health service is and what that looks like, but if we're serious as a nation about talking about preventative health, we need to create different opportunities. What does that mean the GP service and healthcare service needs? I don't know, but I think everybody would be very keen to hear from them to understand what that would look like. So it's not something I say glibly, Sandesh. I don't question for a minute that our GP and our health service isn't incredibly busy, but at the same time, there's a very small investment into Scottish sport that can't solve all of these things. But genuine partnerships and opportunities, I'd like to think, are something we would all welcome to move that forward. But I'm certainly not an expert in the GP system, Sandesh, so thoughts or ideas would very much be welcomed, I'm sure, by all.
Sandesh? Oh, your microphone does.
Thank you.
Back on now.
So I was in GP on Monday seeing patients, and we don't have a minute to be able to do anything except for what it is the patient has come in for. Often multiple issues, often very complex, difficult things going on. Now, there was a scheme which was part of the initial GP contract, and it was supposed to create community links workers across all practices, which would then allow GPs to say, do you know, I think you would benefit from something outside of traditional medicine, outside of traditional drugs, maybe see the community links worker whose entire job it was to ensure that that person did get out to the community, did know what was going on in the local services, so whether that be sport or whatever. And that funding has not come through. We've had a massive fight to keep some of the most deprived areas, most deep-end practices having GP community links workers. And surely that's the type of thing we should be doing. It's impossible for a GP to be able to do this and know all the things going on in the community for all the different topics that we see. But surely community links workers is what we should be fighting for.
I think that's exactly the point I was referring to, Sandesh. As you say, I'm aware it doesn't exist in the full way that it was certainly hoped that it would, or perhaps that at one point did. This isn't in any way an issue with GPs. Our GPs are incredible, and every single person throughout the country values what they do. So it was in no way a slight on them, Sandesh. But I think your point is exactly the opportunity. What a great conversation for sport and public health and the GP systems to have together to say, let's talk about where there is potential. Where are there opportunities? Where could we collaborate and do something different? I know Forbes has regular conversations with colleagues in Public Health Scotland as well. I think it's an opportunity, Sandesh. Nobody's being critical. As you say, if there's resource or conversations that could be had around the role of community links workers to provide some of that support, amazing. I think it's opportunities, not criticism.
And I fully agree that this is an opportunity, and it was part of the contract that should have been delivered. But I want to talk about the promotion of sport and physical activity. So I was a member of my local council gym, and the membership, my annual membership ran out, and I went to renew it. It works out at £32 a month to join this gym. I decided not to renew, and I'm spending £16 a month at Pure Gym. I don't understand how we have got to a point where it is so expensive to be part of your local community gym. And if, one of the things, again, Kim, that you said was, if there's nowhere to go, we are snookered. And I think for lots of people, £32 a month for going to do activities, which is very important, that is a huge amount of money that I just don't understand how it can be that high, and us to maintain healthy relationship with sport and physical activity.
I don't know who you want. I don't know who wants to come in on that. Sandesh, I absolutely agree. The point is sport should be affordable and inclusive. I suspect the experts on this are our colleagues at COSLA who aren't around the table today. But I suspect their answer, and apologies, I'm slightly guessing at that part, is saying 90% of investment in sport in Scotland goes through local authorities. For the most part, that money is not ring fenced. And therefore, I don't know what that spend looks like. If there was the opportunity for some of that resource to underpin accessible memberships for a range of those different community facilities, I think that would be great. But they're decisions that are taken at a local level and not a national level as things stand at the moment. I think, the idea of having a strategy for sport is certainly something that I think our members would advocate for, which again, we talk about some of those partnerships from national and local translation. But I think it's also being clear, which I suppose ultimately is your point, Sandesh, is saying the idea of local authority provided sport is the idea that that is a universal service that's available to everybody. And as you say, it's funded at an appropriate level. And I'm struck by speaking with the former Chief Exec of High Life Highland. And I remember him saying to me on day one, which is possibly a conversation you heard as well, Sandesh, and he said on his first day in the job, he happened to stand at the window of his office and look out over the car park of the sports centre. And he said the car park was filled with BMWs and Audis. And he said, if they're the cars that are fulfilling in our car park, then actually we're not meeting the target market of actually making sport and physical activity accessible to everybody. There's a funding challenge, I'm sure, within that, Sandesh, but I take your point. The same point is probably also true of community sports clubs, though, a lot of whom are based out of local authority facilities and are therefore having to pay rates, to pay for those facilities that they then have to pass on to members or for people for drop-in sessions. The cost is a considerable and ongoing barrier for people to be physically active, and that is something that I think as a nation we need to consider and try and work out how we address at national and local level.
And certainly, I want to refer to a letter written by 39 organisations with the chair of the Scottish Gymnastics writing the letter, but it was on behalf of 39 different organisations back in November 2025, speaking of how the programme for government in 2021 promised to double funding to sport to 100 million and speaks of a 25% real terms reduction before the money that is currently allocated is in place, which doesn't bring it up, doesn't make up the doubling, but also speaks of how things have become really difficult, speaks of how 37% of adult and 38% of children don't meet recommended physical activities, on how there's a 25% increase in the cost of sending sports people across the world to compete, and most worryingly of all, that a significant number of athletes who compete on the world stage are now having to self-fund. I think it's absolutely disgraceful that athletes, people who are representing us in Scotland, are self-funding to do that. We should be paying them and thanking them for what they're doing. So I'd just like to comment on that letter and to say, that we've seen real-term cuts to budgets over the last 4 or 5 years, and right now that £40 million that we've got still doesn't bring us up to where it really should be.
Happy to come in on that point. I agree with all of the above. We work closely with both the Scottish governing bodies, and I think the letter from Scottish Gymnastics that you refer to is almost on behalf of governing bodies, as a collective case that they made. The exact same case can be made and would be made if Community Leisure UK or COSLA were sitting here on behalf of local partners. They would make exactly the same case. So which part of the system you choose to fund and which parts aren't funded is always a balance. I would advocate for more money for sport. Obviously, that's my role and my job. The additional monies that have been announced in the budget going into next year are welcome. Half of that money, so half of the 40 million, is what I would describe as core money, so expecting that it will recur in future years. The other half is to celebrate some of the sport, which is also welcomed, but it does leave that gap to the commitment of doubling the budget. There's still a £30 million gap there, so if the ambition or the commitment was to move to 100 million, there's a £70 million budget next year. But over the period of that of the last Parliament and when that commitment was made, of course, inflation has been pretty significant, and so we're only ever just starting to catch up in some of these matters, and everything moves on again. So we are continually prioritising. Sports Scotland have to prioritise their budget. The governing bodies are prioritising their budgets, and the local partners are doing exactly the same. I would always advocate for more money for sport.
And I suppose the most important thing to say before my last question is there are other gyms available. It's not just the one that I happen to mention. If we look at sports and the playing of sports, and I know we've already spoken about women and girls. We had a report which talks about how they don't continue to participate despite everyone starts off in school, and I know we've already spoken about dedicated women when it comes to coaches, dedicated women when it comes to volunteers, and trying to really promote this. But I wonder if there is a place in our local community council gyms, in our local community areas, where we're able to promote, I would like to say, mothers going and participating in physical activity, because again, one of the strands that we brought out in our report was that if a young girl sees their mother participating in physical activity and sport, they're far more likely to do so themselves. So is there, in the view of witnesses, a place for our local community assets, gyms, swimming pools, other places to be trying and thinking about ways to get mothers in particular into sports physical activity?
Yes, definitely, and immediately comes to mind, and given my previous roles, work done by a sport like Scottish Swimming, there's a huge programme of mothers and babies swimming. You would probably find that in most pools across Scotland, but I'm sure if we went and spoke to our local partners, there will be a lot of examples of mothers, young girls classes, which we could bring back more information on, but I'm almost certain they will be there, because it is recognised, that piece of research has recognised the impact that a mother has on her children's participation in sport. So I'm sure we could do more. I know there is activity going on, and we could certainly find out more information about that for you.
Thank you.
Elena Whittam.
Thanks, Convener. I was going to spend some time speaking about the barriers to physical activity. Now, obviously, we've spent a lot of time already discussing that, and the answers to my colleagues. So I was trying to think about how I could think about the entire of the ecosystem across all of sport and physical activity. I used to be the chair of our local sports council, and also chair of the Leisure Trust, and causeless spokesperson that covered this area as well. And I think we're missing how we actually pull all of it together, I think, and that there's already been made mention of that. Now, everybody's responsible for their part in the system. But if we think about barriers and cost and being able to access things in your local area, is there a space in this for how we actually empower our communities a little bit more? So if we think about community asset transfers and where local communities have been taking on the assets and actually widening out access to people, and supporting things like Biosphere bikes down in Garvan, or Cycle Station and near my house, that do that kind of social enterprise with access to cycling and bikes. Is there a golden thread that we're missing? How do we actually pull all of it together so that all of the bits of the system support people to actually engage in physical education and activity?
Happy to go first. We've referenced a couple of times the Physical Activity for Health framework, which developed by Public Health Scotland. I think recognised that it's been based on worldwide evidence applied to Scottish context, and we've certainly put our weight behind that, our full support behind that, and we're working very closely with Public Health Scotland, and now with I think we're on to 15 local authorities to use that framework as the tool to talk about local planning, linked to the community planning partnerships and how that all connects. So for me, that's the, maybe not quite the golden thread, but that's the thing that pulls us together, and it recognises that sport and leisure is one component part of the Physical Activity for Health framework, but you need all different 8 components to be firing up if you want to make a population change in physical activity. So that's the go-to, if you like, at a local level. That's the tool that's now being adopted by local authorities, and we're working closely with them and Public Health Scotland to develop that. And it's very much developed with local communities, with local people who feed up into that framework, describing what their environment, what their community feels like, and what they would like to see more of. That's probably the best tool that we've got to do that. We do, through our work, we pull together on a regular basis the local authority and the leisure trust leads and the governing body leads. We pull them together. We talk about joint planning. We talk about how we work better together. We talk a lot about understanding each other's challenges and priorities and problems. Local partners having different priorities sometimes, but definitely issues and challenges, and important that governing bodies and national partners understand some of those and that they can work together to overcome them. So lots of bringing local and national together to join things up, but the physical activity for health framework, I think, is probably the key tool that we have just now. It's early days, as I say, 14 or 15 local authorities using that as a planning framework. Glasgow were the first to publish their new strategy last year from that. I know there's a few others just about to publish their strategies in the back of it.
It's very interesting to me that you mentioned community planning partnerships, because I think that, having been a member of a community planning partnership, I know that the overarching aims of the entire area and all the community planning partners stem from that body, and all the decisions flow from that. So I think it's a very helpful comment that you made there. David, do you want to come in as well?
Yeah, I think the physical activity health framework is a generational opportunity for these type of things. We're talking about systems-based approaches towards addressing significant issues around health inequalities, which we know is a significant problem in terms of life expectancy and healthy life expectancy within Scotland, and the role of sport and physical activity within that. As Forbes said, Glasgow Alive were the first to develop the strategy in partnership with Public Health Scotland, and I think them and the other local authorities which are in the process of doing this, what we need to do is to understand the process that they've undertaken and being able to review it as well to see where these connections are being made and where more of the significant challenges are. So, for instance, are we making really good connections at local authority level between sport, health and transport, as an example? Are we making really good connections between sport, health and education? And are these connections really strong and really stable and therefore sustainable moving forward? I'm now going to be on the leadership group for the development of the strategy in South Ayrshire, so we're really trying to do some research around the process and how it works and review it in 12 months' time and so on and so forth. And I know that Public Health Scotland have been doing that as well with Glasgow Alive. So I think there's a really, really good opportunity here. Well, more than good, an excellent opportunity for the sort of thing that you were talking about in terms of a joined-up understanding and a golden thread of what's actually happening and taking place. Because one of the, I suppose, the strengths and weaknesses of such an approach is that, you're not saying you're giving more money to it, you're saying you need to work better with different people and different organisations and different partners to develop that. So that is both a strength and a potential weakness within it. But in the current climate, then it's the most appropriate approach to take. And I think monitoring that, evaluating it and reviewing it continuously will give us a far better understanding about how well these connections are being made.
That's helpful, thanks. And Kim, I know you want to come in.
Exactly to your point about community planning, Elena, so SCVO, where I also sit on the board, SCVO would tell you there are over 45,500 voluntary organisations. There are 13,000 sports clubs. So sports clubs are a third of the voluntary sector. So to your point about communities, sports clubs are at the heart of literally every community. So the contribution to community planning, I think, is incredibly important. The work that Forbes outlined is groundbreaking in terms of sport being part of community planning. Because actually, if you look at community planning partnerships beyond those examples, sport is very rarely, as I'm sure you've probably experienced yourself, around the table for community planning. So they tend to be represented by the third sector interfaces, but the connection between sport and third sector interfaces is traditionally very poor and very limited. So this is an opportunity for sport to be part of that table, be around that table and to have some of that conversation for the first time. So for those examples, as Forbes has said, that are already progressing really well, is really positive. For more areas that want to take that on, I think is really positive. But I also think it's a conversation to have around community planning in other areas to say, have you thought about sport? Where are you hearing the local voice of sport, and where is that connection? I think to your point about community asset transfer, I think there are many great models of where community asset transfer has worked well. And I know Scottish Football are doing some leading work in that space. But I also think there's the liability of community liability transfer that we need to be very aware of, and there's quite a lot of nervousness from some areas around that, which you'll understand. But I think there are a number of examples. I know Scottish Football are pushing an idea around a voucher scheme for young people to be physically active, particularly through summers and a range of holidays, where again, if it's young people that couldn't afford to be active, there's actually a system that allows them free access to a range of things. Now, that's a conversation that we had in previous manifestos, and I think is well recognised across our members as being a model for young people and people with a disability to be active in a different kind of way. Similarly, our members have talked about the idea of there being club open days. So like there's doors open day, but saying actually could sports clubs be part of that wider sustainability opportunity to say, your sports clubs can be open at whatever point point at different stages, but just again, communities being welcomed in to understand what's happening, what's available to them, come in, come and try something, and each sport could be part of that conversation. So I think there are a number of initiatives at a local level that create that community empowerment in a different way, but many opportunities and different things we could do, I'm sure.
I think that's helpful. I know John wants to come in. I don't know if we've got time, Convener. Yeah, John.
It was just referring to Glasgow 2026, where the legacy program is embedded within that process, and they have set up a meeting with 56 organisations last year who have kind of come together to look at how they go through and use the games. On Thursday night, there was a presentation with Scottish Athletics, Sam H, Daily Mail, Scottish Disability Sport, talking about how they were linking together, kind of using that common thread through from the games. I know, Forbes with Sport Scotland, all the colleagues are also linked into that particular process as well. So there are some good examples, I think, where things are linking up across the whole system. I think is probably a next step to go through and do. But certainly there's a lot of open communication channels between everybody down this line.
Good to hear. Thank you.
Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Convener. Thanks to the panel so far for their contributions. Also had a bit of a buzz from the Winter Olympics recently, but we know that there are significant barriers to entry to winter sports, not just the climate that we have in Scotland, which tends to be more temperate and unreliable in terms of snow coverage, but also the equipment costs and the facility costs are significant. So there tends to be significant class barriers to access to winter sports. One of the sports we do tend to do quite well in is curling, and obviously there will be, probably a big significant uptake in people booking slots on curling rinks around Scotland. Just want to ask about how you envisage improving access to winter sport participation in Scotland, particularly given the recent loss of facilities like the X-Cape at Braehead, which is an indoor snow slope. What other opportunities can there be to enhance participation in winter sports?
Happy to start. Great to see our curlers getting so much profile and prominence, and I'm really looking forward to the Paralympic Games starting. I think the opening ceremonies on Friday and the games starting Saturday, and we've got again a good contingent of Scottish athletes as part of Paralympics GB, so all the best to them. I'll start with curling, and again quite well documented some of the pressures and challenges for curling rinks across Scotland. We've seen a couple of those close in the last year, and we know that there are a number of them which are under threat, and that's the first and primary issue that we need to continue to raise and find solutions to. Without a session with Bruce Mowat last year after he won the World Championships, and Bruce was making the point it's fantastic to be recognised and celebrated as World Champion, but if there's no curling rinks, there's no future World Champions, and so we need to continue to work on that. And curling rinks, we're doing a specific piece of work with Scottish Curling to look at the age and state of the curling rinks in Scotland and start to develop some plans as to how we protect and at some point start to replace some of those. On the snow sports side, Scottish Snow Sports do some great work, and they utilise the dry ski slopes across Scotland. Again, some of those are under pressure, but there are some fantastic participation programmes at dry ski slopes. I do absolutely accept there's a big step from taking part in a dry slope to then getting onto the snow, either in Scotland, if it comes in Scotland. It's been a good season this year, but that's not always the case, or quite often now, and maybe increasingly going abroad to be able to ski, and there's a huge financial barrier to that, which I accept. But the dry ski slopes do some really good, again, community-based work.
Just briefly, Paul. So I think, I think we talked earlier about role models, and I don't think you'd look very far away from our men's curling team to look at, wow, what incredible role models across Scottish society. So I think that's something we certainly want to recognise. Secondly is the incredible work that Scottish Curling do around their tri-curling programme. Again, I'm not sure how close members are to that, but again, it's certainly something worth looking at. So we talk about inclusive, affordable and available opportunities for people to be active. It's groundbreaking work that they're doing. It's available, in communities across Scotland. So it's certainly something to be looking at. And I suppose the third part, in terms of thinking legacy, as you say, we've obviously had the Winter Olympics, we're about to have the Paralympics, as Forbes said, but in 2029 in Edinburgh we're hosting the Mega World Championships for curling, which is the most inclusive winter sports event there's ever been in the UK. So certainly something to look forward to, but again, to your point of inclusion and people being accessible, this is the most inclusive event that's been run. So again, huge opportunity as they build on the successes that have already happened through our teams and will continue to come, but again, towards a huge event for us to be able to celebrate in Edinburgh in 2029.
That's great. Thank you. Picked up on the costs of running some of these facilities. We've seen common themes emerge with swimming pools. The ski slope at Bray had to close because primarily of energy costs. Has there been any work done to see how policy interventions could be developed to reduce the costs of operating such facilities, given their obvious public health benefits?
There are a number of examples where you look at, if you build a new building, a new efficient building is an awful lot cheaper to run than an older 30, 40 plus year old building. I think our report, which I referred to earlier, the States report, will highlight 70% of the sports facilities in Scotland are 40 years or older. So that you can imagine how inefficient a 40-year-old building is, and sometimes retrofitting those buildings to make them more efficient is even more expensive. So it's net zero is featured quite heavily in our estates report, which I said will come out just after the elections. We'll publish that report, and it talks quite a bit about the cost of making our buildings much more efficient. And I know that's only one part of it, but we think that's a significant part of it. Very hard to deliver and achieve, but that's something that we need to consider really carefully in the years ahead, how we fund the replacement, the renewal and the further enhancement of our estate.
Okay. Look forward to reading that. Just want to move to sort of future visioning for Scotland. We obviously have, as a country, developed a significant capability in multi-sport event hosting, major event hosting for sports. Not only 2014, but obviously then being able to quick notice, adjust to host 2026. Significant challenge. I wonder, even if it is at a slightly early stage, whether we ought to be considering the revised criteria from the International Olympic Committee about hosting potential for Summer Olympic Games. Certainly, I know Northern England cities are looking at a potential bid with the British Olympic Association. Should Scotland actually be contemplating potentially participation in a British bid for the 2036 or 2040 Summer Olympics? And what could that potentially look like? How do we use the 2026 Commonwealth Games as a way to demonstrate our potential, given that Brisbane's successful bid for 2032 hinged significantly on its successful hosting of the 2018 Commonwealth Games?
Happy to go first. I think that Scotland has done an outstanding job in the last 20 plus years at hosting major events. Event Scotland's strapline, their strategy was Scotland the perfect stage, and I think we've demonstrated that across a whole range of events, from Ryder Cup, Commonwealth Games. I'm excited about obviously the Commonwealth Games this year. There are major cricket events coming in the years to come. The Tour de France Grand Depart happens next year. People will be aware, it's quite openly talked about, that we're part of a joint bid for the FIFA Women's World Cup in 2035. It looks as though the UK will be awarded that, and Scotland will host group stages of that. I personally a huge fan of major events. I think they give inspiration to volunteers. I know in my time working in swimming, when we hosted the IPC World Championships in Glasgow, when we hosted the European Championships in Glasgow and the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow, there was a massive group of volunteers that when I go along to more local swimming events now, it's still the same group of people that are day after day, night after night, weekend after weekend, running local community swimming programmes. So I'm a major fan. I'm a huge fan of major events and advocate for them. What's really important is that when we do go down the major event route, is that there's significant and appropriate money that sits alongside the event to allow us to activate those events and to take full advantage of them. And we must make sure that when we are bidding for attracting and securing these major events, there's an appropriate budget that sits alongside that to activate the event and get everybody in the community involved.
It wouldn't surprise you to know I'm also a fan of major events. I was actually taking my first major event at the age of 9, 52 years ago, which was the Commonwealth Games, and obviously sitting in front of you here today, it obviously had some impact. I wouldn't say inspiration at that particular time, but impact is probably a good word. I'd repeat in terms of what Forbes has said, is in terms of looking at two bids and deliveries for Commonwealth Games. Certainly going into it, we have the facilities, the business development, the people skills which have been developed over 20-odd years. The stage of going into further bids like that, I think one of the lessons coming out of Glasgow 2026 was really looking in terms of the finance. It's obviously a privately funded games, and I think where we've led the way, or Scotland's led the way in terms of a new model for the Commonwealth Games, probably waiting for that new model to come through from the Olympic side will give more opportunities in the future. What they may be, we don't know, but certainly we're very proud that we've secured the future of the Commonwealth Games with Ahmedabad 2030 coming through, and also Nigeria, who bid for those games, also expressing interest in 2034. But I think, like most areas, the nature and structure of these kind of major events like the Olympics will change over a period of time, and by the time the next bidding area is available, I think it will probably open up to being more accessible to a wider range of countries. It would like the what we've done through here with the kind of Glasgow bid.
Great. Kevin, Dr. Meyer, I wonder if you have a view on whether Scotland should join this emerging Great Northern bid for the 2036 Olympics, whether it should be proactive about participation in that, or indeed a 2040 bid. Is that something we ought to actually seriously engage with?
I think the conversations we've had with members have been not quite as long-term as that in that respect, Paul. I think, as Forbes and John have eloquently outlined, we are the perfect stage. We have hosted so many tremendously successful events. The legacy from events is really important, and as Forbes said, there needs to be funding that works with that, and it's looking at legacy in its broadest view. So I'm conscious that, I think one of the big disappointments for our members, and probably more broadly, is that there wasn't a volunteering legacy from the 2014 Commonwealth Games. Now, obviously, 2026, we've stepped in and are making sure there's a future delivery, much to the work that John and his colleagues have done. So we're looking at legacy slightly differently from that point of view, understandably. But that's a huge part of anything that we need to consider in being able to do that. But I suppose the other part is recognising that, major games aren't just multi-games, if that makes sense, or multi-sport games. Many of our governing bodies host many successful events. We've talked about a number of those, but literally year on year on year, Scottish governing bodies working with local partners support, any number of national, international, regional, huge scale events. I talked about Parkinson's earlier as an example. People come from across the world to come to our Parkinson's table tennis event. So, whether they're national events or international events, we have hosted successfully so many different sets of events, and governing bodies continue to do that. And a huge part of that, I think, is also the respect that governing body volunteers get, and individuals who represent on the world federations or European federations who are championing to make sure that Scotland can host these events that are decided by international and European federations. So let's not forget the people that are making that happen, and that we're providing support and resource to them. But I think events is such a broad part, Paul, but I think we're very good at it in very many areas. And again, I think it's something we need to continue to recognise.
Thanks. I don't know if you have any points there. Okay.
A sort of multi-nation bid for the host of the Olympics. So just because of the stuff that we're talking about, people can't access necessary facilities. There's significant issues in terms of opportunities for people. We're talking multi-billion-pound investment. The cost of London 2012 is 12 to 14 billion and rising. The notion of a legacy from these mega events is nominal. So and we're seeing lots and lots of cities rising up in protest against, from Boston to Chicago, Frankfurt, I think it was. So you're opening up a can of worms. You're talking about investing billions and billions of pounds in something which has nominal returns for the issues that we are actually talking about today.
Okay, thank you.
So I've got two members who want supplementaries. If they're brief and the answers are brief, we can get them both in. So Brian Whittle and then Joe Fitzpatrick.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to spin all the way back to where I was before. I think one of the things we talked about, the participation of youngsters in sport, which is, I think, is a lifetime, investment, if you like, in terms of health. My concern is, and they've talked very much about, some of the great work that's going out there, some of the fantastic things that sport is doing, and the impact that they're having. But we have loads and loads of clubs who have waiting lists. So you've got kids who want to participate. We want to, and so David, you talked about this we're flatlined in terms of participation. We've got all these kids that want to participate, yet can't get access to the sport that they want to participate in. So I suppose it comes down to, how are we developing the volunteer element of that to increase the capacity? Because if the problem is we always blame our youth, they want to do it. If we're not giving them the opportunity to do it, how do we square that circle?
Two things for me, trying to keep it brief. It's good to see we're starting to see an uptick again in volunteering. So as Kim mentioned earlier, there was a big dip in volunteering. People didn't come back who were previously volunteering. Post-COVID, people didn't come back, but we're starting to see those numbers coming back through again, which is helpful, because the two critical barriers that I hear about, and the reason there are waiting lists, are not enough volunteers, volunteer coaches, people to run the sessions, and not enough access to facilities. They're the two reasons why I think there are waiting lists for some sports.
I agree completely, and I suppose to be pointed, I suppose there's 4 actions, I guess, in terms of asking for a legacy for your follow-on committee. So one is this committee has been very engaged in sport and the work that you've done, and coming out to visits and things. And convener, I know you and Paul have been to a number of things. So again, I would very much welcome that for your successors, whatever that committee looks like. I think to the points that Forbes raised around facilities and volunteering, I would very much suggest they are cross-committee entities. They're not anything that's specific to sport. But again, in terms of a legacy ask for future committees, that could be an amazing cross-committee piece of work that the Parliament does to really talk about volunteering, to really talk about community facilities. So that would certainly be an ask. I think part of it is an infrastructure element, Brian, in recognising that people being more active and the health benefits, as Sandesh talked about, that people get from that it's kind of everybody's responsibility. Sport can play a part in that, but physical activity and people being more active is a responsibility that many of us hold. I know there's a future review planned of the National Performance Framework. We've talked before, and again, I know it was in one of the committee recommendations for the Women and Girls report. If it was a specific national outcome for people being physically active and their participation in sport, that places a responsibility differently to everybody, and for everybody to be part of that, that's certainly something that we would welcome. And I suppose the fourth part is this committee, I think, has very strongly, and again, I think it was a title of one of the reports, recognised that sport is an investment and not a cost. We're sitting on the brink of more money in Scottish sport than there's ever been. That's a huge investment and a huge opportunity. So for the committee to continue to champion that, and the work that we've done across Scotland for the Summer of Sport and being able to visit that, I think there's a lot that the committee can do. But passing the baton, if you pardon the pun, Brian, to your successors in the next committee to say, actually, if they could continue in the vein that you guys have been working on, then I think collectively we're in a much stronger space.
Thanks very much. And just wanted to carry on from that last point that Kim talked about there in terms of the Summer of Sport. We talked earlier about how well effective. I'm going to turn that huge injection of funding on the other side. That half of that money, a significant amount of money, is for the Summer of Sport to make sure that there's a long-term legacy. And often we think about, I think wrongly, legacy as being about the buildings, but really it's about the people. So how do we make sure that significant injection that's coming in there is able to have a legacy in terms of people? And I think it's important that when we're talking about people, we go wider than just, it's not just kids, it's older folk as well. And I'm going to put a punt. Forbes will be aware that in swimming, the Masters are just doing fantastic. I'll give a punt to my sister, who just won 6 golds and a silver at the Masters in Carlisle. So 60 whatever, and she's got back into swimming. And how do we encourage folk at all ages to take the advantage of the Summer of Sport to improve their access to sport and physical activity going forward? So I'll go to Forbes first, given a mention. So
no bother. We have been working with a group of local and national partners. Met last week, are meeting again tomorrow to say how do we create the right criteria, the right direction around about Summer of Sport, but don't overdo that. We recognise we've got quite a short window. We need to get money out, particularly to local partners, to allow them to do the planning and get on with it. So we're just finalising the criteria, the focus, the monitoring requirements around about Summer of Sport. My ambition is to show that this is a huge success and make the case to the next government that this shouldn't be a one-off strand of money, that this should happen every summer. And if we are ambitious, about people being physically active and sport being a central part of Scottish society, then we should be celebrating sport every summer, every single summer. If I look back over the last 10 years, there's a massive array of brilliant things going on, so that would be my encouragement. But the key thing is working with local partners, because they know best. I've said it a few times, they know best as to what their communities want and need in their specific challenges. We don't need national organisations getting in the way and being overly bureaucratic about that, so we'll listen to them and empower them to get on with it.
John?
Just make a quick plug for the King's Baton Relay, which will be in Scotland in the month of July, and community organisations can register through the All-In section on the Glasgow 2026 website. And again, I think that's a great opportunity. The power of the games and the power of the baton that's there, the idea is taking it to community events, and that in itself will draw people in. It's obviously a great showcasing opportunity for people. So, yeah, really looking forward to getting those applications in so that we can take the baton to as many places as possible.
Brilliant, thanks. And David?
Well, yeah, obviously fantastic that the money's come into sport. Of the 40 million, 1 million is highlighted for Health in the Community campaign, targeting areas with low activities to become and stay active. In terms of the policy, where we sit with the Physical Activity for Health framework, that is a fundamental element within that. And if we're talking about legacy, we mentioned moving forward, that is where significant levels of investment need to go if we're going to make significant changes in terms of engagement and participation for those who are the least active.
Thank you. And Kim?
It's a great question. I sit on the group that Forbes mentioned, and the conversation that we had last week was genuinely really positive and as Forbes said, really cross-cutting. I suppose in the conversations that we've had with members, the priority is around what can sustainably be done with that amount of money. So in conversation actually with one of Forbes' colleagues yesterday, I know there's a real strength being added to that work around supporting clubs. So it's obviously work that Sport Scotland are doing more broadly, but in terms of how is supporting clubs a key part of that work in order that they are providing that sustainability. So it's not just a one-off activity through the summer, it's beyond summer, and it's with clubs being a key outlet, and those links to community clubs being the real opportunity for people to continue to participate. I mentioned the club open days. That's an idea that's come out of part of that conversation to again say there's a sustainable piece if clubs could be part of that opportunity. Unsurprisingly, there's a real opportunity and a real interest from a number of governing bodies. A few of the larger governing bodies have had that conversation with us to say, if you start to look at, the number of clubs there are, if you start, think there's over 500 golf clubs, there's a real opportunity, I think, for them to be part of some of that work in terms of, that sustainability of a club. But again, there are 13,000 sports clubs across Scotland. The opportunity for them to be part of that, working with local partners, and for that to be an essential connect. I think it's about being beyond just the summer, which I know is certainly the plan. But I think the monitoring and evaluation point is really key. And I suppose this is difficult in the time frame, as Forbes said, that the money needs to get out the door in order that people can plan and make sure that we're delivering quality opportunities. But I think the excitement that we all see, we've been advocating for the doubling of the sport budget for the last 5 years, since it was obviously a programme for government commitment, one you'll remember well, I know, Joe. But, the opportunity to use this money to say, this is a cost of living intervention, this is cost of living money. Well, actually, we know sport and physical activity changes lives. What opportunity is there to monitor what's coming out of this to say this has changed the lives of children and young people, to be able to say, right, could more of this money be sustainable? Could it be an ongoing commitment to say, actually, sport is a really valuable tool across communities across Scotland, particularly for young people, but community resilience, social connectedness, all the bits that we know. So that's the interest in it. It's just getting that balance of money out the door and creating those right conditions. But I'm sure we'll get there, and it'll show you an amazing summer and beyond.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Kavina.
Thank you. Can I thank the witnesses for their attendance and for their evidence this morning? And I'm going to suspend the meeting to allow for a short break and a changeover of witnesses. This is the draft statutory instrument which requires approval by resolution of the Parliament before it can become law. The purpose of the instrument is to amend the Civic Government Scotland Act 1982, Licensing of Skin Piercing and Tattooing Order 2006, to remove the requirements for acupuncture therapists to wear disposable non-latex gloves should they know the client they are treating is infected with a blood-borne virus. The Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee considered this instrument at its meeting on the 3rd of February 2026 and made no recommendations in relation to the instrument. We will have an evidence session with the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health and supporting officials on the instrument. Once we have had any questions answered, we will proceed to a formal debate on the motion. And I welcome to the committee Jenny Minto, Minister for Public Health and Women's Health, Lucy Oren, lawyer, and Alan Parry, Health Protection Team Leader, Scottish Government, and invite the Minister to make a brief opening statement.
Thank you, Convener. I would like to thank the committee today for giving me the opportunity to speak to the Civic Government Scotland Act 1982, Licensing of Skin Piercing and Tattooing Amendment Order 2026. This amends an order made in 2006, which is used by local authorities to licence and inspect any business providing skin piercing or tattooing in Scotland, and lays out a number of requirements aimed at reducing the health risks to the public when accessing these procedures. The amending order removes the requirements of acupuncture therapists to wear disposable non-latex gloves when treating someone they know to be living with a blood-borne virus. Removing these requirements removes any doubt for the therapists. It will be clear that they should not feel they need to ask their client if they are living with a blood-borne virus, a question that we know some people feel uncomfortable to answer. This amendment will also help to reduce the stigma people living with a blood-borne virus may feel when accessing acupuncture treatment. Other existing requirements to wear disposable non-latex gloves in certain circumstances will remain in place. For example, should the therapist be handling items that are contaminated with blood or bodily fluids, or if they or their client have open lesions, the requirement to wear disposable non-latex gloves will remain. Therapists make the decision on any other reason to wear disposable non-latex gloves through individual risk assessments on a case-by-case basis. Since the original order came into force in 2006, there have been many advances in the treatment of blood-borne viruses. Vaccinations and antiviral medication mean people can maintain healthy lives through the treatment options available. These advances mean transmission of HIV has greatly reduced. The hepatitis B vaccine offered today for babies and people at high risk provides protection against acquisition, and hepatitis C can also now be cleared in most cases with medication. I must highlight that acupuncture is considered a low-risk procedure. Should therapists continue to feel they need to ask their client about blood-borne viruses and treat them differently if they confirm a positive status, then this is no longer considered to be justified given the advances in treatment and the low risk posed by this procedure. Sadly, people living with blood-borne viruses still face forms of stigma on a daily basis. The Parliament's Equalities, Human Rights and Civil Justice Committee held a focused inquiry in 2024 on the importance of reducing HIV stigma. They heard from people living with HIV in Scotland who spoke about the stigma they encounter and the effects of this, particularly within healthcare settings. The Scottish Government remains committed to helping reduce this stigma through promoting the positive impact of effective treatment and prevention available today, and by championing the changes required to ensure people who live with blood-borne viruses are not treated any differently to others. These amendments will assist in ensuring people are not asked unnecessary questions when they are seeking treatment and supports us in delivering our commitment. I can advise that throughout the consultation, no stakeholders objected to amending the order to remove the provisions, and no other evidence was provided to support further amendments to the 2006 order. It is not expected that this amendment will have any detrimental effect on businesses in Scotland. Thank you for considering this amendment, and I now request your support to progress this order and welcome any questions you may have to assist you in your decision.
Thank you, Minister, for your opening statement. No member has indicated that they have any questions at this point, so we'll move to agenda item 4, which is the formal debate on the instrument on which we've just heard your statement. Can I remind the committee that officials may not speak in the debate? Minister, can I ask you to move and speak to motion S6M 20591?
I move the motion and have nothing else to add to my previous statement.
Thank you, Minister. The question is that motion S6M 20591 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Thank you. The committee is agreed, and that concludes consideration of the instrument, and yourself and officials are free to leave as the committee continues its work. The next item on our agenda today is consideration of 5 negative instruments. The first of these is the National Health Service General Medical Services Contracts and Primary Medical Services Section 17C Agreements, Miscellaneous Amendment, Scotland Regulations 2026. As part of the 2018 GP contract offer, it was agreed that pharmacotherapy and community treatment and care, or CTAC services, would be provided by health board teams rather than GP practices, and this arrangement was brought into law in 2022. The purpose of this instrument is to allow health boards to agree with GP practices that those practices will deliver part or some of these services if the health board is having serious difficulties in doing so and certain criteria are met. The Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee considered the instrument on the 10th of February and made no recommendations in relation to the instrument. No motion recommending annulment has so far been lodged in relation to this instrument. Do members have any comments? No. I propose that the committee does not make any recommendations in relation to this negative instrument. Are members content with this? Yes. Committee is agreed. The second instrument is the National Assistance Assessment of Resources Amendment Scotland Regulations 2026. To enable local authorities to calculate an appropriate contribution to be charged to residents in residential accommodation for the cost of that accommodation, the purpose of this instrument is to increase the value of savings credit disregard from £8.50 to £8.95 for a single person and from £12.60 to £13.25 for a couple, in line with average earnings, which is currently forecast at 4.8%. And to increase the lower capital limit from £22,000 to £22,750 and the upper capital limit from £35,500 to £36,750, in line with CPI forecast at 3.8%. The Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee considered the instrument on the 17th of February. The DPLR Committee made no recommendations in relation to the instrument, but noted that it would be helpful if the approach to rounding off the savings credit disregards was set out in the policy note to explain the difference between the figures and the stated percentage increase. Further background to this is set out in the DPLR Committee correspondence with the Scottish Government. No motion recommending annulment has so far been lodged in relation to the instrument. Do members have any comments? I propose that the committee does not make any recommendations in relation to this negative instrument. Are members content with this? Yes. Thank you. The third negative instrument is the National Assistance Sums for Personal Requirements Scotland Regulations 2026. For the previous instrument to enable local authorities to calculate an appropriate contribution to be charged to residents in residential accommodation for the cost of that accommodation. The purpose of this instrument is to increase the value of personal expenses allowance in line with average earnings, an increase of 4.8%. This will increase the weekly rate of this allowance from £35.90 to £37.65 from the 6th of April 2026. The Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee considered the instrument on the 17th of February and made no recommendations in relation to the instrument. No motion recommending annulment has so far been lodged in relation to the instrument. Do members have any comments? I propose that the committee does not make any recommendations in relation to this negative instrument. Are members content with this? Yes. Thank you. Excuse me. The fourth negative instrument is the National Health Service Common Staffing Method Scotland Amendment Regulations 2026. The purpose of the instrument is to amend the National Health Service Common Staffing Method Scotland Regulations 2024, which specify the staffing level and professional judgment tools that must be used as part of the common staffing method for specified kinds of healthcare provision. The Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee considered the instrument on the 17th of February and made no recommendations in relation to the instrument. No motion recommending annulment has so far been lodged in relation to the instrument. Do members have any comments? I propose the committee does not make any recommendations in relation to this negative instrument. Are members content with this? Yes. The fifth and final negative instrument we are considering today is the Social Care and Social Work Improvement Scotland Cancellation of Registration Order 2026. The purpose of the instrument is to prescribe the circumstances other than following the giving of an improvement notice and the expiry of a period for improvement specified in it, in which the Care Inspectorate may use the power conferred by Section 64(1) of the Public Services Reform Scotland Act 2010 to propose to cancel the registration of a care service registered under Chapter 3 of Part 5 of that Act. The Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee considered the instrument on the 17th of February and made no recommendations in relation to the instrument. No motion recommending annulment has so far been lodged in relation to the instrument. Do members have any comments? I propose that the committee does not make any recommendations in relation to this negative instrument. Are members content with this? Yes. Thank you. Committee's content. At our next meeting, we will undertake periodic scrutiny of the work of Public Health Scotland, and that concludes the public part of our meeting today.